I'm Wendell Gray, and today I'm going to read selections from my third volume of the Lucky Cat series, The Lucky Cat and the Gods of War. Again, I am rebranding this, so this is not the actual cover these days, but it is still the same content, so let's get started. We're going to pick it up with going back in time. If you haven't read the first couple of volumes, they're starting to get into the history of the Super States and what happened with them, as well as what happened with Komori Ando's family. So my first reading, I'm going to start with Video 1. The Psy Family Register is the chapter title, and the section I'm going to be reading is The Psy Family Apartment over the Mandarin Duck Lounge, Chicago, Illinois, 2075 AD. What kind of nonsense is this? It should be illegal. I don't want anyone over here getting any ideas. Shuren Sai looked up from the grocery list he had been preparing in the kitchen and glanced back into the living room across the hall, where his father Zhenyan sat in his favorite easy chair. Although it was late at night and they had to get up early to prepare for the restaurant's customers, his father was glued to his favorite news program on TV in the dim room full of moving blue light. Curious at the uncharacteristic vehemence in his father's voice, Shuren put down his pen and walked over to the living room doorway. His father's eyes blazed with anger as he clenched his fist at the TV. "What's wrong, Dad? Did something happen back home? It's not like you to get so upset." His father looked up at him, his face suddenly haggard. "Back home in Taiwan? No, not yet anyway. It's a coup in Britain. Didn't I tell you nothing good would come from these revolutionaries? It won't end there, you know. It's not unless someone puts a stop to it now. It will spread to Taiwan, here, everywhere." "A coup in Britain?" Shuren walked into the room and sat down on the couch near his father. "Was this something expected? I don't recall hearing about political unrest there," he added, a little bewildered. "You haven't been paying attention, Shuren. Most people haven't been since they closed down most of the media outlets. Now this show is all we've got." "Is that why you've been staying up late these days, to catch the late-night news broadcasts?" At age 22, Shuren Sai had been busy getting his business degree so he could help manage the restaurant, and he hadn't had much time to watch TV these days or follow politics. He vaguely remembered an announcement about the news media being limited even as the number of TV channels seemed to expand exponentially. His late mother had been particularly fond of the volleyball channel before her sudden death 2 years before due to heart failure. Few people, Shuren knew, seemed to care about the programming change. Only his father missed the old broadcast style of around-the-clock news and made the time to watch the remaining news show at 1 a.m. every weeknight. "They're hiding what they're doing, but I could see this coming. You should start staying up with me to watch the news, and I'll tell you what to look for." "Those snakes. It won't stop there. It's just a matter of time now. Look here." As the female anchor came back on the screen after station identification, the report turned to Britain's election of some group called the Futurists Task Force, which Shuren had heard about on his college campus in recent years. They'd been rallying for some new ideas about government cooperation, the formation of new countries they called superstates, and the harmony of all peoples. His father turned the volume up until it was ear-splitting. Shuren glanced around the room nervously, alarmed that someone outside might overhear, since the building in the X district of Chicago was old and the walls were thin. These days, even dollar stores sold drones and cell phone technology that allowed spies to decipher conversations just from the vibrations on the windows. One could never be too careful, but Shuren had never seen his father so distracted and alarmed. The old man clearly wasn't thinking about spies. From what he had seen at school, the futurists sounded a bit sinister, although the news made them sound rather benign, even exciting. Shuren could only sit in silence as the broadcast continued. "Now we turn to our correspondent Alex Garner in Damascus," the woman on TV was saying as the video clip of the impeccably dressed group of 20 bureaucrats filing into British Parliament ended. A young, sandy-haired Caucasian man spoke into his headset on the bustling city streets of Damascus in front of a busy, if old-fashioned, shopping district where a small group of citizens protested. "Right now, I'm standing in front of the Souk al-Hamidiyya, where protesters are gathering over a meeting taking place between Syrian leaders and the satellite group of the political party, the Futurist Task Force, which has just taken over Britain. We're all awaiting word on whether the Futurists will be permitted to participate in the ruling coalition. They certainly have enough votes, but approval would make the decision as stunning as the victory overnight in Britain. The broadcast quickly cut off the foreign correspondent and returned to the Asian anchor in London. While there is confusion and excitement over the election of the Futurists to British Parliament, London and Damascus aren't the only places in the world where the Futurist task force has taken over the imagination of the populace with their upbeat, comprehensive plans to improve societies. They become a force to be reckoned with on every continent. Reports are coming in that they are also in talks to take over leadership in cities as diverse as Shanghai, Bombay, and even Moscow, though the group keeps its highest levels of leadership anonymous and organizes globally without as much fanfare as one would expect given their influence. Due to its low profile and broad plan for social progress, the Futurist Task Force has generated some nervousness on the international scene, where some states have argued their sovereign rights are in danger. But the party insists they're working from sound principles that most people can agree on as the basis for the sweeping reforms they propose, and so they have made great inroads into universities and corporate boardrooms around the globe. Many prominent public figures have pointed to their clear thinking and detailed policy positions, which have helped spread their popularity. For every critic, the Futurists have found 2 or 3 champions, and experts have said they find their positions hard to fault. Many people think it's time for a change and hope for a glorious future for humanity. Zheng Yan snapped the TV off mid-report, causing Shiren to jump slightly in surprise. "Is it over? Shouldn't we keep watching?" he asked his father in alarm. "I don't quite see what the problem is. Is this Futurist Task Force a new political party? I've heard of them, but I haven't had time to go to any of the rallies." "Don't go to their rallies. Don't go near them. You'll see soon enough," his father grumbled angrily, sighing and grabbing the armrest of his chair to stand. He walked down the hall to his bedroom, leaving Shiren alone in the darkened living room, wondering what had gotten into the old man. Section 2. Time had proven his father right. Shiren was chagrined to see the terrifying headlines over the next few years as the Futurist Task Force seemed unstoppable. Though he was sure the officials kept news kept it brief, bland, and sanitized. Even he could read between the lines as parts of Europe fell to bloodless drone attacks and the population was moved around. Then the first new superstate of Iznaten arose in the Middle East, with only 6 member states in 2078. News reports turned more and more jubilant with each of the Futurists' victories, predicting that the Americas would soon come under the enigmatic, visionary spell, too. Soon the Futurist Task Force had moved its operation to Canada, Mexico, and Central America, and crept from all directions toward Illinois as its leaders began strategic drone strikes on the southern United States. Hoping to avoid similar military action in its territory, Canada nervously agreed to sign a treaty to bring them peacefully to power. However, it was his father's clandestine newspapers, tattered and photocopied until the words were barely still legible, that really left Shiren afraid. A few observers as suspicious as Zheng Yan had been passing around a one-page True Bystander newsletter, suggesting the superstate actually had advanced AI warrior technology that the states of Europe and the Middle East had no defenses against, and quoted eyewitness statements of unreported but widespread slaughter of undesirables. Appalled, Shiren hid his father's strange newspapers from the rest of the family and employees, and tried to make excuses for his father's growing anger. One night when he had enough of the old man's conspiracies, he confronted his father when they were alone during the official late-night news broadcast. If he couldn't impress upon his father the need to stay silent in the face of what was going on, they might attract unwanted attention. His father had noted, "Dad, when this news broadcast is over, we need to talk. Don't go to bed right away, okay?" Shiren said, looking over with concern at his father where he sat in his favorite stuffed recliner. His father had just nodded as he once again turned up the TV loud enough to rattle the windows. Shiren knew by now that it was an act of rebellion since his father's hearing wasn't that bad at only 52. Glancing nervously around the room, knowing the Futurist Task Force was now turning its attention to North America in earnest since it had just taken over Canada, Shiren got up, pulled the remote firmly out of his father's hand, and muted the television as he turned on the closed captioning. His father looked at him a moment in irritation, but he didn't say anything. His eyes turned back to follow the subtitles on the screen in the darkened room. Shiren only glanced at the broadcast here and there, since he was too keyed up about the talk they needed to have. but he did notice a headline flash across the screen about the Futurist Task Force beginning treaty negotiations with Prague after a lightning drone attack and a few election wins there. Biting his lip, he had to admit they were effective at getting the people on board with whatever crazy idea they had for a new utopia, and they were nearer to declaring a second new superstate, this time in Europe, with the countries they had coerced into their orbit. Still, reports were vague about what the Futurist Task Force stood for. Prosperity, unity, and peace were the typical slogans, but Shuren didn't have any idea what the party meant by them, even after 3 years of closely watching the political situation. When the news broadcast ended, his father got up and shut off the TV. Only the dim light from a small lamp in the corner of the living room flickered a little, as if the light bulb were about to burn out. Jayan sat back down on his chair and looked at his son expectantly. "Well, what did you want to say, Shuren? I can see you're unhappy about something." "Dad, I've seen those other papers you've been getting. I don't think it's healthy for you to be reading them anymore, and we probably will get in trouble if anyone finds out about them. No one thinks any of that trash is true. Why do you even bother with it?" Jayan looked over at Shuren shrewdly and fumbled around in the small magazine rack beside his chair as if looking for something. "I have them, Dad, so you won't find them there." His father looked up at him angrily. "If you want to know why I keep reading them and believing them, bring them to me, and I'll explain." Shuren walked across the room to the desk. Its drawers were always locked because they held flash drives and hard copies of important papers for the restaurant, but Shuren had the extra key. Opening it, he pulled out a stack of one-page, legal-size onion skin sheets from a side compartment and brought the bundle back to his father. Jayan took them eagerly and began to shuffle through them until he found the paper he sought. "This one is the latest." Jayan handed him the newsletter. Shuren read the first few headlines and noticed a dark black-and-white photo printed on the bottom of the page. Taking it from his father, he walked over to the lamp to study it more carefully. Chamonix District Seer murdered, village wiped out by AI Army, a report by Weiwang Liu. Shuren read the headline aloud in a soft voice. The photo at the bottom of the article showed a grotto of some kind near a stream and rocks or a shallow cave. A rose bush taller than the man standing next to it hid part of the folk painting of a beautiful young girl dressed in a simple gown, her long, dark hair blowing around her on the rock wall of the cave. An iron rack of tall, thin candles burned near the back of the cleft in the rock, on the other side of the painting, and long circlets of beads hung from the low branches of a tree not far from the rose bush. Looking at the photo, Shuren felt his hair stand on end, though he didn't understand why. He looked up at his father uncertainly. "Was this the article you meant, or was it the one on the back of the sheet?" "The woman and her husband, yes. Please read it. This was the latest paper being passed around among those of us who still care about such things, for there aren't many of us left. So many have gone over to their side, Shuren. Maybe it's too late even for you, too." Shuren looked back at the article and began to read. Beyond France. The Alps have fallen to the Futurist Task Force as their plans for a new superstate of Eurasia begins to take shape, but local reports from the Chamonix resort area bring more bitter news for residents, as whole villages in the region have been wiped out to rid the new state of their superstitions and backward cultural traditions. One such region, according to eyewitnesses, is an area not far from Legoland. For nearly 40 years, elderly Seer Giselle Guerin, 63, and her husband Raphael, 59, tended to a mystical snowdrift variety rosebush known throughout the region for its healing power in its milk-white blossoms. Devotees assert that the roses could be cut and put in a vase for their miraculous power to heal all physical deformities and illnesses of whatever household they were kept in, and its scent reportedly could keep evil at bay. Many who have been healed by its power claim to have experienced strange visions around the bush, which was also thought by some skeptics to have been merely an extension of Madame Guerin's unusual powers of observation and prophecy. They left votive candles, prayer beads, and painted the icon in thanksgiving for their healing. In the past few months, however, terror struck the area as superstate soldiers began to comb through the population for those deemed worthy enough to take to the new cities under the Futurist Task Force leadership, a move which eyewitnesses said ended in the slaughter of a number of the villages near the old shrine. The task force was reported to have sent AI monsters into the villages to execute the residents before dumping the bodies in a nearby mountain stream. As regular readers of True Bystander know, The fledgling superstate of Eurasia has been founded on the blood of those considered expendable and marked for destruction, but most of the reports have not been so lurid. Many people who have not been taken to the cities have been sent instead to locations known only as workers' camps, though so far no one has returned from these camps and none of this paper's informants have been able to investigate them closely. Sharan looked up from the paper, exasperated. Who are the people circulating such things? Wei Wang Lu? Why does that name sound familiar? He asked his father, trying to control the anger in his voice. You don't believe this? Zheng Yan's tone of voice held more challenge than skepticism. Of course not. Our leaders don't do such things. We left all that behind in the 20th century, didn't we? We're reasonable people, and by all reliable government accounts, the emerging superstates have been formed primarily by treaty. The Futurist Task Force is currently in negotiations here in the U.S. to expand that way as well. And the drone attacks? Even you have heard about them. The drone strikes are just a warning for troublemakers. There's always going to be some sort of riffraff not willing to go along with things. I'm sure there's nothing more to it. Who are the people who run this paper? Who actually reads this stuff besides you? The man who runs the underground paper is my old friend Wei Wang Lu, who lived here in Chicago before moving to Madrid. You should remember him from your childhood since you went to elementary school with his son. An ethnic Chinese. Yes, and he ran a restaurant too, for a while, but he went there to study some Spanish culinary techniques just as the first few countries formed the kernel of the Eurasian superstate in 2076. He had been writing me letters about the cooking school's classes when things turned bad. He was very frightened by what he saw, especially when he compared it with official reports coming out of Europe and America. I have no reason to doubt him, Sharan, since we've been friends a long time, and he was always a man of integrity. But I have every reason to doubt our leaders. You're still young enough to be too trusting of the authorities, but my friend isn't. I'm not. He was the one who started circulating copies of his letters with the real news he saw, which he eventually turned into this one-page newspaper he could send the same way, the old-fashioned way, as a letter to friends. And this seer, Madame Guérin, is it? Why should she interest you? She sounds kind of sketchy. Madame Guérin was anything but sketchy. The man who wrote that report met with some of the eyewitnesses to the slaughter. He had even met the woman herself years before, and had only wonderful things to say about her. So he was very troubled by this news. But even if you disagree with her lifestyle, cultivating miraculous roses and reading people's minds, why should the woman and her husband die in such a horrible way? As you said, we're supposed to be reasonable people, yet we murder some woman who believes in visions. If her ideas meant nothing to the superstate, why do such a thing, Sharan? Don't you think this is a problem? Why doesn't it worry you more? How many other slaughters like this have happened in the superstate's hands since they took over? A few, though most people have just disappeared into these workers' camps, never to be seen again. No one has been able to figure out exactly what sort of work they're meant to do in the camps, even beyond the other concerns their existence has raised. How many were executed like the victims in Chamonix? 500? That's not many when you consider the population of the area is now under Futurist control. You have to break some eggs if you want to make an omelet, I say. Zheng Yan looked at him sharply and grabbed the newspaper out of his hands, wrapping it back into the roll he had made with the other editions and holding on tightly to them. Wait until you get married and have kids of your own. You're too young and stupid yet, Sharan. One day you'll see why a harmless old woman's death matters in the larger scheme of things. Zheng Yan got up and stalked off to his room, taking the papers with him. He hadn't even looked back at Sharan. Crazy old man, Sharan said to himself, flipping off the light switch on the lamp and plunging the room into darkness. It suddenly felt colder than usual. Sharan stood there a moment and thought in dismay that they had spent too many years living like they still were in the 2020s, with the cheaper old technology in their home to save money for the restaurant, which had a state-of-the-art kitchen and fashionable interior decorating for the dining area. Now they would pay the price for living in that time warp with his father's backward thinking. Glancing one last time at the silent, darkened room, Sharan walked down the hallway to his bedroom and shut the door behind him. Next one from this section is section 4. When Sharan noticed that the golden Lucky Cat statue he still defiantly kept on the shelf behind the cash register had disappeared that day on 2091, it had marked a turning point in his thinking. After the cat statue had reappeared in the shadowy corner behind one of the stuffed leather chairs in the reading room, Sharan couldn't stop wondering how the statue had moved. It was impossible. Did his father move it there? Later that night, after closing time at 10 p.m., when his assistant Aunt Showang had returned to Shiren's house down the street, Shiren went into the reading room again, shutting the door behind them. No one else was in the restaurant at that moment. Zheng Yan was probably still upstairs in the apartment where he now lived alone, but Shiren hadn't gone up yet to mention the strange discovery and demand an explanation. He wanted to investigate a bit before questioning his father. Peering behind the chair where he had seen the cat statue earlier in the day, Shiren was shocked to see it was no longer there. Frantically, he looked around every nook and cranny in the room, eventually dropping to the floor to look under the chairs. Finally, in the dark space under the largest of the chairs, he saw a pair of glowing green eyes looking back at him. If the statue could fit under the chair, then it had to have changed position drastically. His mind fought against the idea. It was just a statue he had bought on a short business trip to Tokyo before the fall of the world's countries to the superstates more than a decade before. He had felt it, touched the surface, and knew without a doubt that it was just a statue. But now what sat under the chair? He lay on the floor a moment, trying to think of a way to coax it out, as if it were a real cat. Before he could come up with a method, the plump feline body emerged from under the chair on its own, a fringe of its golden yellow hair ruffling as it brushed against the chair's bottom. Shiren looked at it aghast, his worst fears confirmed. It wasn't really a statue at all. It was alive. The cat came over to him where he rested on the floor, and sat calmly before him on its haunches, its greenish eyes full of intelligence and curiosity. "Have you finally come around to see things my way, Shiren? Your father was quicker to understand, but he's getting too old to fight," the cat said in a high-pitched, childlike voice. "What?" Shiren asked, scampering to sit cross-legged before the strange creature, now the size of a domestic cat. "Are you the one who made my father so difficult? Does he know you're like this, that you can talk? He never mentioned anything like that to me." "He doesn't know, but we cats have our ways even without announcing our presence. I'm one of many who have awakened to help. My name is Aeon, and your family has been chosen. Your father has been fighting them on his own, creating a resistance movement without really understanding that was what he was doing. She holds him in very high esteem." "Who is she? Who could you mean?" Shiren asked thoughtfully. Suddenly remembering strange dreams he had started to have recently of a beautiful Asian woman sitting in the shadows of some old-fashioned castle, he realized there was something not quite normal going on. Perhaps that was who the cat was referring to. Aeon looked at him knowingly. "You know, don't you? The Empress has called out to you, too, and if you remember her, you are among her chosen, like I told you. We need your help in getting the resistance movement more organized. There's no human power that can effectively outwit the superstate. You will need our help." "What do you want us to do?" Shiren asked in amazement. "Should I mention you to anyone? They may see you back in here when they come in to read and ask questions." "Leave that to me. Your father is thinking about retiring now since he is 65, and he plans to leave the restaurant to you and Sushan, though difficult days are ahead. You don't have much time to finish your work before they come for you, but I will stay with you no matter where they take you." Shiren shivered a little at the cat's words. Pulling his sweater closer to him in the chilly, dim room, he stared at the cat a moment before a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. The cat immediately glanced suspiciously at the door and scampered back under the chair, out of sight, as Shiren struggled to stand before the door opened. Suddenly, Sushan appeared in the doorway, the bright light from the kitchen behind her blinding Shiren. "Oh, there you are. Why are you in here, Shiren? We were supposed to meet your father for a late dinner for his birthday, before going back to the house. Did you forget that was tonight? Ansho has been asking if he can move in upstairs with your father, so I invited him along. I thought we could discuss that tonight at dinner. Are you okay? You look a little pale." Shiren walked out into the industrial-sized kitchen, gently moving her out of the doorway and shutting the door behind him, without a glance back at the cat. "I'm fine. I was just thinking that perhaps we need to get a few more books in the room, and that we should have it under lock and key in case any of the restaurant's patrons go in there by mistake, looking for the bathroom, or we get raided by the superstate." "A key won't keep the superstate from looking in there," Sushan said gravely, looking at Shiren in concern. "I know it's important, but it makes me nervous to have that in a place that could so easily be discovered. I wonder if we should put a false wall there, or maybe some sort of cupboard or barrier to keep it out of sight. That way, any search parties would only know to look there if they had a floor plan. Given how old the building is, it wouldn't be that easy for them to get an accurate one. Shuren smiled at his wife, admiring her ingenuity, but Aeon's words suddenly came back to him. You don't have much time to finish your work before they come for you. For some reason, Shuren believed the cat, though he felt helpless to cope with the situation. He decided he needed to have a private talk with his father after dinner that night about the encounter with the cat. He was sure his father would believe him, since many of the newsletters Zhengyan had gathered from his friend in Spain often remarked on supernatural events that the superstate was trying to suppress around the world. It seemed likely that Zhengyan wouldn't be surprised by this revelation, even if he hadn't encountered the cat himself. On to video 2.